Hey, so in my previous video I hinted at my Warriors of Chaos project, where I plan to convert all of my favorite units from the rulebook for each Mark of Chaos. And a bunch of you asked to see the army as it currently stands, so let's take a look. Alright, so if you didn't see my previous video, let me quickly explain what I'm up to. I'm making a Warriors of Chaos army for Warhammer the Old World, but I'm making one of almost every unit for all 5 Marks of Chaos. And I know that's not the most efficient way to make an army, but I'm not really a power gamer, so I don't really expect to win any tournaments with this army. Alright, let's start with the Mark of Nurgle because that's probably the most fleshed out so far. So here's that Demon Prince that I put together in my previous video for the Solstice of Skulls competition. I already explained his backstory in that video, so I'll make it quick, but basically all of my Nurgle units are corrupted Bretonnians, and this Demon Prince is patient zero for their downfall. He was a questing knight who was deceived and drank from a false grail, and when he returned to his castle, he brought Nurgle's rot with him. So the court alchemist encased his body in molten silver to contain the plague, which obviously didn't work. But check out my previous video for the full process that I went through with this guy. But mainly he's based on Kragnos, with a custom printed head from Tzeentch, and the cloak from Horus Ascended. Next up for Nurgle is my Chaos Lord on foot, and you might notice that he's on a round base even though this army's for the Old World. And that's because I made most of these guys before the Old World was released. I'm still not sure if I'll put everything on new square bases or if I'm going to make custom movement trays or what. But anyway, this guy was built around the Khorne Slaughter Priest with a breastplate from some putrid Blight King, and his head is another printed head from Tzeentch. His right arm actually comes from the Forge World Angron kit, and the sword comes from the Hellstriders of Slaanesh. And I love this combo so much that I actually already used it for my Terminator Lord, for my Word Bearers. But that's another video. Next we have some Chaos Knights with the Mark of Nurgle. These guys are mostly built with the previous Chaos Knights kit, and I'm really bummed that that kit was discontinued because it has so many cool and useful bits. You can see that a few of them are chunkier than standard knights. For those ones I used Puskoil Blightlords. Basically for all of my Nurgle units, I tried to use whatever bits I could find that look like classic medieval knights rather than like northern barbarians, because I really want to invoke that Bretonnian look. So there are some custom heads and lances and shields mixed in. I also tried to paint some sort of like demented Nurgle heraldry with bright Arthurian colors. I'm not totally happy with the paint scheme, but I think the message comes through. Moving on to the Warriors on foot with the Mark of Nurgle. For these guys, I follow the same philosophy. They're a mix of Maggotkin, Chaos Warriors, Empire Knights, and things like that. The goal was to invoke a twisted Arthurian vibe, while avoiding that northern barbarian look that comes with Warriors of Chaos bits. I also tried to tone down the Nurgle corruption a little bit because the putrid Blight Kings can be a little over the top. For the paint scheme, I went with a uniform heraldry this time, as if they're representing their lord and haven't received their own heraldry yet. So that's what I've got so far for the Mark of Nurgle, but let's take a quick look at my future plans. So for the Nurgle Sorcerer, I think I might do a corrupted version of a Bretonnian damsel. I'm thinking like a swamp hag based on this orc shaman. And for my Chaos Lord on Demonic Mount, with the Mark of Nurgle, I really want to do a corrupted Bretonnian Green Knight. I'll probably also use orc bits. This guy specifically. I'm thinking he could be the mysterious phantom who led the Demon Prince astray in the first place, back when he was but a mere baby-faced questing knight. I also had a vision of doing a sorcerer on Manticore using the Talia Vedra kit. This would represent that original court alchemist who failed to stop that poor knight from corrupting the realm. Okay, let's talk about my Chaos Undivided units. And that's because in the lore for my army, that's where this whole thing started. The Chaos Lord leading the entire army is named Valkadi Kul, also called Valkadi Blacksteel, Flameborn and Chosen of the Gods. So she's my Chaos Lord on Dragon. It's pretty obvious that she's supposed to be a proxy for Archaon the Everchosen. Those of you familiar with the Old World will also know that Archaon's model is way too big for anything in the Old World game system. Again, I made her back when I was still planning to build this army for Age of Sigmar. So at some point, I'll probably have to make a smaller version of her. I really like what people are doing with that new Ionis Cryptborn dragon, so I think I'll give that a shot too. But anyway, this is the leader for my entire army, and if you want to read her lore, you can actually check out my blog post. There's a link in the description. The bits that I used for her come mostly from Archaon, obviously, but I don't like Dorgar's cartoony heads, and plus this isn't supposed to be Dorgar, so I turned him into a classic two-headed Chaos Dragon, using both of the heads from the Orruk Sluddraker beast. For Valkadi's body, I used Eternus, a random female head, and a ponytail, which I think comes from some Dark Elf kit, I can't really remember. I also have these two dragons that I originally put together to represent manticores in Age of Sigmar, because I don't like the old manticore kit, and because AOS doesn't have Chaos Dragons, but now that the old world came out, there are Chaos Dragons again, so I guess I have 3 of them. These ones are just a simple head swap and rider swap. This guy here was my Chaos Lord on foot, but I think I'm going to cut off his spear and build an old school banner and use him as my battle standard bearer. Instead, I'm going to use this guy as my Chaos Undivided Lord on foot. You might be asking why he has wings. Well, I built him back a long time ago using the Anvil of Apotheosis rules, which allow you to make a custom character. But now that the old world is out, I'm either going to cut off his wings and put him inside of a unit, or maybe I'll let him keep his wings, and it can represent that magic carpet item. That could be pretty cool. I don't think I've ever seen that done before. Next, my current project, which is actually on my table right now, is a unit of Chaos Ogres. I'm really trying to lean into the corrupted and mutated aesthetic with these guys. Instead of making a whole unit of Chaos Ogres for each mark of Chaos, I'm thinking a single ogre for each mark, and a bunch with no obvious mark. And that way, if I want to give the unit a mark of Chaos when I play the game, I can just move the appropriate guy up to the unit champion position. And the mismatched look of the unit will make sense in my lore, because they're not supposed to be an entire tribe that fell to Chaos together. They're individual outcasts from a ton of different tribes that all banded together under Valkadi's banner. And speaking of banding together under the dreadful banner of Valkadi Blacksteel, next up are my Marauders. In the lore of Valkadi, which again you can read in the link in the description below, I mentioned that she encounters the Tong tribe, which in the official lore are a mysterious and barely fleshed out tribe. But it's mentioned that they're horribly mutated and cruel, to the point where other Chaos tribes are actually afraid of them. So my Marauder horsemen are literally horsemen. Actually they're deer, but I hope no one notices that. I used Wood Elf Wild Rider mounts, and for the torso I used Cruel Boys for that slightly inhuman look. And so the Marauders on foot will also be based mostly around Orc Cruel Boys, but with Marauder head swaps to make them human. For my Gorebeast chariot, I'm converting yet another Orc kit. This time it's the Maw-Grunta. You can see I removed any obviously orky bits, and I cover the gaps with round shields, skulls, trophies, and other trinkets, and hopefully this invokes more of a Northern Marauder vibe. I'm not sure what I'll do about the rider yet, but I plan to model him so that he could either represent a regular Chaos Charioteer, a Chaos Lord, or even an Exalted Champion with a battle standard. Now, the rest of my Undivided units are just standard Chaos Warriors built per the instructions with very little or no kitbashing, so I won't spend too much time on them here. But the paint scheme for these guys is a classic black iron look with a little bit of rust to pick out the details. I also give all of my chosen and unit champions flaming weapons to represent Valkadi's favor. I imagine that she gives all of her champions weapons forged in her dragon fire. Alright, let's take a look at my Khorne dudes now. The backstory for these guys is that they're former Knights of the White Wolf. In fact, that Nurgle demon prince from earlier was originally going to be a fallen Empire knight captain who was executed for false and craven political reasons. But ultimately, I like the Nurgle angle better. So I need to come up with some new reason why these guys abandoned Ulrich and started worshipping Khorne. So these warriors are actually the first unit that I ever converted for this army, and they're the reason I actually started the entire project. I saw an old video on Warhammer TV where Duncan shows you how you could make Khorne warriors by mixing a box of Chaos Knights with a box of Khorne Blood Warriors. And the best part is, when you're done you have enough bits left over to then make 10 Chaos Knights with the mark of Khorne as well. So that's what I did. This is another reason why I really wish they didn't discontinue those older Chaos Knights. Hey, so you'll never guess what happened, but as I was editing this video, they announced that they're bringing back a bunch of old kits, including these Knights. So I'm pretty stoked about that. It's so clean and easy to make all kinds of conversions with them. To show that these guys are former Knights of Ulrich, I sprinkled in a few Wolfy icons among them. Although I'm just now realizing that I should have given them hammers too, because that's what the Knights of the White Wolf carried, which is a pretty big missed opportunity. For my Chaos Lord on Demonic Mount, I went with the obvious and classic choice, a Khorne Juggernaut. I gave him a lance though because, once again, he was originally made for AOS, and that was the best option at the time. For my Khorne Chaos Lord on foot, I did this really simple head swap, and I think it works pretty well. The body comes from some Khorne guy from Underworlds or Warcry or something, I can't really remember his name. And the head comes from the Jackal's kit from World Eaters. For my Khorne Demon Prince, I'm going to base him around Angron. And now those of you in the know will be aware that Angron is huge. Absolutely massive. Well, I wish you guys would have told me before I ordered all the bits, because I didn't know, and I have no idea how I'm going to fit him on a 50mm base. I'll probably have to stand him more upright, but he's going to be comically massive next to my other demon princes. but I guess a mountain of muscle is pretty appropriate for a Khorne worshipper. I'm currently scraping off all the sci-fi bits, and I think I'll leave off his wings as well, because I don't like them. I'll probably go with a trophy rack instead. And for his face, I'll probably use this mask from the Chaos Knights kit. And I mean the big, stompy, sci-fi robot Chaos Knights, not the fantasy ones. Or maybe I'll use this head from the Lord of Skulls. And I also have this axe head right here from Forge World to replace his sci-fi chain axe, because that wouldn't fit. Next, let's talk about the units with the Mark of Slaanesh. I've got pretty good solid design rules for the look of these guys, but the lore still needs to be fleshed out. Basically, the lead sorcerer at the head of all my Tzeentch units is a Tong shaman who Valkadi Kul met and enlisted into her army. Similar to the Thousand Sons in 40k, all the warriors under him are mindless thralls who he controls with his lieutenants. My design rules for these guys include multiple limbs, preferably an odd number for asymmetry, smooth armor plates to show off the color shift paint, which I'll get to in a second, and eyeless helmets. And that's for the creepiness factor and to emphasize their mindless nature. Actually, mindless is probably the wrong word. I don't think they're empty suits of armor, like the Thousand Sons, but they're definitely enthralled by their lord. They've been physically blinded, and they're driven mad by the fact that they see the world through the winds of magic, kind of like when Frodo puts on the One Ring of Power, and only their lord can keep them under control. For my Tzeentch Knights, I followed the same rules, but I used the newer Knights kit. This kit is beautiful, but it's really monopose, which makes it hard to convert multiple units and have them look different. For example, it's really hard to tell the difference between my Tzeentch Knights here and my regular Knights. So for that reason, I'll probably never use this kit again, which is unfortunate, because it's awesome. For my Lord of Tzeentch, I made this guy. His model is mostly made from Chaos Chosen bits, and what's interesting about him is that he seems pretty normal. Compared to his underlings, he doesn't look overly ornate or superpowered like most Lords of Chaos usually do. And that's because in the backstory of my Tzeentch units, it seemed to make more sense that the leaders would be the ones who didn't go insane, or the ones who could resist the mutating gifts of Tzeentch long enough to climb the ladder of power. So he's got the eyeless helmet like the rest of them, but his mind and body remain relatively unchanged. But I needed to mark him out on the tabletop, so I think I'll give him a Disc of Tzeentch, but that's assuming that I'll still be able to rank him up. And it's really just a fancy base. I don't intend for it to represent a mount, but if I can't find a smaller disc, I may actually let it represent that magic carpet item that I mentioned before, because it's not a mount, but it allows a character to fly at the cost of being able to join a unit. So we'll see. Speaking of all that, here's my Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch, and he is going to be on a Disc of Tzeentch / Magic Carpet. And for all the reasons I mentioned above, he also has less mutation than the regular units. I built him around one of the Khorne Wrathmonger's models for a couple of reasons. First, the idea of a wizard who's absolutely yoked is hilarious to me. And secondly, I saw this incredibly sick conversion and paint job from Heretic Scott over on Instagram, and it really inspired me. But it also makes sense within the rules, because as far as I know, Chaos Sorcerers are the only wizards in the game who are allowed to wear armor, let alone heavy armor, and they get an ensorcelled weapon. So they can be right up there in the front lines giving and taking a beating. And I've also made a unit of Forsaken with the Mark of Tzeentch, or actually I guess they're called Forsaken by Tzeentch, which is a really cool little detail. These guys were not going to be specifically a Tzeentch unit, but I used them to test my Tzeentch color scheme, and I loved it. So imagine all the previous units painted up just like this. These guys used the legs from Khorne Wrathmongers, the torsos from Khorne Skullcrushers, and the limbs from Chaos Space Marine Possessed, with some random chaosy heads and shoulder pads sprinkled in. And last but not least, let's talk about my units who have the Mark of Slaanesh. I feel like I came up with a decent design language for these guys, but I have zero backstory written for them. I just vaguely have this idea that I want them to come from some far-off area to the east or to the south of the old world, but my heart's not really set on that, and I'm not really sure if they're going to be like an existing Chaos tribe, or if they're corrupted like the Khorne and the Nurgle guys. So we'll start with the warriors first because I think they best show off what I was thinking. You can see they all have exotic weaponry, as well as exotic furs and pelts, and for their bodies, I used Stormcast armor because it's form-fitting and anatomical. I think all that exemplifies the hedonistic vibes that come from worshipping Slaanesh, especially when you take note of the darker details that I sprinkled in, such as chains, hooks, leather, and spikes. I'm not sure yet how I'm going to paint these guys, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards glossy black armor with purple and silver accents and maybe white fur. For the Knights of Slaanesh, I follow a slightly different aesthetic, and I covered this in my very first video, so I'll keep it short here. But first of all, you can see that I put them on Seekers to avoid having to use that monopose Knight kit again. And I gave them more flamboyant helmets and shoulder pads because I imagine their status as Knights means they've earned it. My Lord of Slaanesh on foot is based on Sigvald, and I picked him because he's huge and he's sexy, which reminds me of King Xerxes from 300. but also his armor really resembles the model for the Lord of Slaanesh from the Total War video games. In fact, I almost went with this head because it looks so much like the guy from the game. But in the end, I thought this smooth helmet would look better in glossy black, and because it kind of resembles the helmets that I already used for my warriors units. I'm still working on my Sorcerer of Slaanesh, but you can see here that he's going to be a snake dude. The lower body comes from Melusai Bloodstalkers, I think they're called. And for his upper body, I used this dude, because I like the Cruel Boy's lithe yet strong and somehow weirdly inhuman proportions. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with the head though. For the Slaanesh Lord on Demonic Mount, I started this. It's based on some Lumineth kit, but I'm not sure where I'm going to go with it yet. And that just kind of goes to show that a strong backstory is really important for a project like this. Sometimes the backstory flows naturally after you've come up with the design, like with my Tzeentch units, but sometimes you need a story first or your design falters, which I think is what's happening here with my Slaanesh leaders. My rank and file guys I think look great, but I was hoping a story would sort of fall out of them as I was working, which would inform how their main characters would look, but it just hasn't happened yet. But one Slaanesh character that I do love is my Demon Prince. It's a pretty simple conversion on paper, but it was pretty difficult to pull off. So it's the legs from the regular Demon Prince kit, with the torso of the Centaurian Marshal from Warcry. And I'm going to swap out some of the weapons, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But his helmet is very gladiatorial, so maybe that could be used as the inspiration for the backstory. So I just have to figure out where gladiator pits might fit into the story of the old world. But let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas about that. So that's the bulk of my army so far, but I still do have some miscellaneous works in progress that don't exactly fit anywhere yet. And I'm going to show you just a couple of them really quick. Maybe you can help me come up with ideas for how to finish them. So first off, I have the horse body for that Centaurian Marshal left over. I'm thinking I could use this as a really powerful looking mounted exalted champion, maybe even a battle standard bearer. I'm not sure what to use for the mount's head though, because it's bigger than most available horses I think. For the rider, I'm hoping that a Varangard model might be big enough, but I'll have to check. Next, I've got just the Selenar from the Teclis and Selenar kit, and originally I planned to use this as a sorcerer on Manticore for my Slaanesh units, but I think I'm already straying a little too far into the exotic animal realm for them, so I scrapped that idea. But then I was thinking, this could be my sorcerer on Manticore for Tzeentch. And I don't mean that this is the sorcerer's mount, I mean that this is the sorcerer. So instead of my Tzeentch units being enthralled to a Tong shaman, they would be enthralled to a sentient Manticore sorcerer of Tzeentch. Of course, I'd need to really alter her look so she's not just the Selenar. Maybe I could do something weird with the neck using this bit from the Lord of Change kit. Actually, I think I just kind of talked myself into this idea while recording. So scrap all that backstory from before. This is the new leader for my Tzeentch units. Alright, I think this video's gone on long enough, and this isn't even everything either. I've already started toying with the idea of doing Chosen Knights for each Mark of Chaos, and those mounts would be really weird. Like these things for the Chosen of Tzeentch, or these giant cockroach things from Necromunda could be the mounts for some like chosen bug riders for Nurgle. Alright, I really gotta stop this video before someone steals all my ideas. No, I'm just kidding. Feel free to take any of my ideas and run with them. Just be sure to share them with me because I really want to see what your interpretation ends up being. Check out my Instagram if you want to see my previous work. I've got some 40k stuff up there too, I just haven't gotten around to making a video for them yet. And alright, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.